Learning Block 4, Inventory Management. In the last learning block, we learned about activities that occur within warehouses. In this learning block, we'll be learning about the product of stocks, known as inventory, that sits inside those warehouses and distribution centers. Make sure to review the learning objectives for this learning block so you know what to expect as you watch this video, read the chapter, and discuss these topics in class. As you write your Cornell notes on the content, make sure these bolded concepts are covered in your notes and that you have a good grasp of what they mean. Note that some of the terms that you see here in the learning objectives weren't fully described in the textbook, so I will be supplementing or explaining in greater detail in this video. Inventory are the physical assets that are held or stored for use at some point in manufacturing products, completing partially manufactured products, direct sales to customers, or operating maintenance tasks. And there are 4 basic inventory types that align with these processes that we'll cover in just a moment. Now, different types of inventory come with different exposures to risk. Fruits and vegetables run the risk of spoilage and become unusable after expiration. Electronic items like computers and phones are at risk of becoming obsolete, meaning it's near the end of its product life cycle and won't be sold in the future as newer and better technologies get released to the market. And clothing items like these ugly Christmas sweaters change seasonally. Thus, inventory represents a monetary investment and needs to be turned to make a profit. Understanding these exposures to risk will impact the decisions you make as it relates to inventory. Now that we know what inventory is, it's important to understand what inventory management is. It's the process of ensuring the availability of products or stock through inventory administration. Doing so recognizes that not all inventory is created equally. Now, inventory management and inventory control are often used interchangeably in companies. When put together, inventory management is the long-range, mid-range, and day-to-day processes, protection, and deployment, which includes the control of assets in inventory. Now, inventory management helps companies identify which and how much stock to order at what time. It tracks inventory from purchase, which we learned about in the supply management and procurement learning block, up to the sale of goods. Inventory management identifies and responds to trends to ensure there's always enough stock to fulfill customer orders or demand and give proper warning of a shortage, while also avoiding excess or extra inventory. Total inventory costs, known as the acquisition costs, is the purchased item cost on a purchase order plus the carrying costs, such as warehousing cost, labor, risk of expiration or obsolescence that require disposal, as well as damage. The more activities a company performs, such as storing it, moving it, insuring it, and processing it, the greater the cost. Recall last week, we discussed the increased cost for every time we touched a product within the warehouse. So this is just connecting the two concepts. The 4 basic types of inventory are raw materials, work in process, finished goods, and maintenance, repair, and operations, often referred to as MRO. Now, before we get into the inventory types, I do want to break down the types of costs that were mentioned in the reading for more clarity. It's helpful to understand the different types of costs in order to plan accordingly. Direct costs are those costs that are incurred directly as expenses when items are being made. In other words, it goes directly into manufacturing or production, like raw materials and labor. Indirect costs are incurred to facilitate the manufacturing process, but are not incurred directly when performing the manufacturing function. MRO is an example of indirect costs. Variable costs are costs that are incremental and vary based on the quantity ordered or manufactured. So the more you produce, you can expect your variable costs to go up, and the less you produce, your variable costs will go down. Fixed costs are those that remain the same regardless of an increase or decrease in the number of goods or services produced or sold. Examples of fixed costs could include rent or lease payments, insurance payments, or security services. Let's get into the inventory types. The first is raw materials, which include any items consumed or used to make finished goods. So raw materials can be those basic materials from nature like wood or fruits, but can also include subcategories such as parts, components, catalysts, commodities, semi-processed goods, etc. Now, work in process is inventory that has been moved and staged for manufacturing. Work in process is reduced as it's consumed to make finished goods in the manufacturing process or categorized as scrap. Another way to think about work in process is that it's not raw materials and it's not finished yet. It's somewhere in the middle of the manufacturing process. Finished goods are completed products or a service repair part that is ready to be sold to a consumer. So ask yourself, if you as a consumer can purchase it or buy it, then you can consider it a finished good. Finished goods may be unsellable for a couple of reasons. If it becomes obsolete, meaning it doesn't have any value in the market or it's past its expiration. It could need rework, meaning there's some kind of defect on it and it's got to be fixed to make sellable. It could be a return or reverse logistics, which is merchandise brought back from customers. So it was sold, but then it's being returned and it needs inspection or rework. And then quarantine. So this is merchandise that needs to be held for a period to determine if quality has been maintained. Maintenance, repair, and operating, or MRO, is supplies not directly consumed in the manufacturing and operations. Rather, it's products that are consumed to support the operations to manufacture and manage inventory. Think about the tools and supplies used by workers on the manufacturing line. These are not actually part of the finished goods. This could be the safety supplies they use, like eye goggles and masks and gloves, or the hammer or screwdriver they use. Therefore, MRO is considered an indirect cost. I used to be an indirect sourcing manager and was responsible for setting up MRO contracts with suppliers and then identifying strategies and services that helped with inventory management of these items. Inventory turns, also known as inventory turnover or the inventory turnover ratio, measures how efficiently a company uses its inventory by dividing the cost of goods sold by the average inventory value during the period. Inventory turnover ratios are only useful for comparing similar companies and are particularly important for retailers. It wouldn't make sense to compare, say, a biotech company versus a clothing company. A relatively low inventory turnover ratio may be a sign of weak sales or even excess inventory, while a higher ratio signals strong sales, but could also indicate inadequate inventory stocking. Lean refers to operational and procedural practices that create efficient flow, and any tasks that do not add value will get reduced or eliminated. At its core, the philosophy of lean management is to maximize customer value while minimizing waste. It is one of the most popular management systems, and for good reason. No matter which industry you're in, lean is a universal tool that can have a positive impact on any company's performance. Because by minimizing or reducing waste, you're creating better flow and reducing cost. Just-in-time is an approach where the company aligns raw material orders from suppliers directly for when it's needed in manufacturing. Companies employ this inventory strategy to increase efficiency and decrease waste by receiving goods only as they need them for the production process, which in turn reduces inventory costs. This method requires producers to forecast demand accurately. Now, this is where we got into trouble with the pandemic because so many supply chains were using just-in-time inventory so that when the pandemic happened and critical materials and supplies were no longer available for a variety of reasons, manufacturing couldn't do anything because they didn't have the materials they need to produce. Another approach to be aware of is supplier managed inventory, or SMI. This is also sometimes referred to as vendor managed inventory, since some companies use the term vendor instead of supplier. The supplier is responsible for managing the inventory, so we're relinquishing the responsibility to the supplier. In these visuals here, the supplier comes and restocks the products. I've used SMIs on the manufacturing floor as well as for facilities departments at many of the companies I've worked at. A couple of the benefits of doing SMI is it frees up the buying company's staff to do other things by having the supplier handle it. Another benefit is that depending on how you negotiate the contract, the cost of the inventory can be delayed until the moment that it's actually being used by the buying company or taken from the supplier. Lastly, some companies employ third-party logistics providers or 3PLs, and they provide services such as inventory management, which are often bundled with other value-add services. This is useful when the 3PLs have more expertise regarding inventory management than your company may have. And just some friendly reminders: take the weekly quiz before coming to class. You get 2 tries, so you can take your second try later in the week. The best score gets saved. And make sure to submit this week's Cornell notes by Sunday. As always, there's a Quizlet link in this week's module that you can use to get extra practice and extra credit. And if you have any questions, just let me know.